And good morning and welcome to the November program of Triad Coaching Connection. I am seeing that 30 of the 40 some that we are expecting today have already joined. So good morning to all of you. It's good to have you here. And I think you're going to really enjoy, I'm sure you're going to enjoy today's program. Before we get started, as always, I am going to share my screen and share our mission statement with you because it's important for us to always remember what we're about. Our mission is to develop and sustain a learning community that supports coaches and those interested in the practice of coaching. Triad Coaching Connection supports and preserves the integrity of a diverse and inclusive coaching profession through networking, learning opportunities, and educating others. If at any time things that we are doing look like it's deviating from that mission, you need to call us on it because that is what we are founded on and what we try to do. Day to day and especially month to month. You're a beautiful looking group. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm Wanda Swain, the president of Triad Coaching Connection Board of Directors. We had a board meeting this month, and I'm real excited about 2021, right? Who wouldn't be after 2020? So we're going to be announcing lots of really good stuff in the next month or so. So, stay tuned and get ready for an exciting 2021 and opportunities for growth and development. Wow, our participants has just jumped up to 36. I'm going to just remind you of a couple of things that were brought up during the networking session that some of you may not have heard. One was a request that we share our contact information, and if you will open the chat box if you haven't already, and share your name and your area of coaching, and your name is already going to be there, but your area of coaching, your contact information, your name, phone number, so that when we coaches get asked for something for coaching outside of our own area of expertise, we know which one of our members we can reach out to refer that client to.
Oh, yeah, finally, after I bitched about it.
Hello. So I think one of our iPhones is not on mute. Let me see if I can do that right quick. There we go. Yes, the other thing is if you have a book, an article, anything that's going to support our mission of always learning and helping us to continue our growth, please feel free to put that book or article or video, TED Talk in the chat. That's another way that as we're sitting around during this COVID time, we can have our list of reading material or videos to watch. You can save your chat by clicking on down in where you would post a chat message. There's a ... box. When you click on that ... you see save chat, and you can save that chat to your computer so you can, all the great recommendations, the contact information would be there for you to reference later. It's only your chat repopulates every time you log out and back in. So it's important to do it before you leave, or often throughout if there's something that gets posted, just go ahead and save it so you don't lose it. I'm excited about being here with you today, and I'm excited about today's program. Are there any announcements before I give my screen over to Joyce Richmond, who's going to introduce our speaker for today? Any other announcements? Anybody? Okay. Ms. Richmond, I've lost your thumbnail on oh, there you are. Joyce?
Yes. Well, good morning, everybody. And I learned only moments ago that I have this wonderful opportunity to introduce Paul. So although I have pulled up his very generous background that describes his work, his education, I will suggest that you go and read it yourself at Good Works Consulting. So this is what I want to say about Paul. Beyond all the accolades that he has received and the talent that he has, Paul is a good person. Paul is a talented person. Paul is someone for whom humor resides within him. It is part of who he is, and there is a kindness to it. It's never harmful. It's never at someone else's expense. I've had the wonderful opportunity to be a colleague of his at Center for Creative Leadership. I've been in his audience. I've been at the front of the room with him. It's always a delight. So with that, Paul Damiano.
The peanut gallery here. Joyce, first of all, incredibly generous and gracious. You've clearly been talking to my mother. So thank you for that. And for those, some of you know, many of you know Stephanie Lischke. She's here for two reasons, very quickly. She's got to run off to a Zoom call. She wanted to say hi to everybody.
Hi, everybody.
And she, along with Laura Moore, are my technology team because it takes a village to support me. So right now we're going to do share screen and do some other stuff to make sure that I'm rolling, and they're going to help me with that. Share.
There you go.
Okay, and then what about my picture up there? Is that
Okay.
Can we do that? Ah, no, I think that's
All
okay.
right. Good.
Okay, everybody can see and hear me.
They're all on mute.
Oh, they're on mute. Okay. Would someone give me a thumbs up? Can you? Yes, they can hear me. Okay, good. I am seeing thumbs up. Well, good morning. And again, thank you, Joyce. Truly, it's incredibly gracious of you. And I got to say, you know, a lot of people start off and go, I'm really glad to be here this morning. But look, I sincerely am. In fact, I had spoken to the program committee, several months ago about doing this. And of course, there was already a lot of speakers and commitments and so forth. So I was really glad to be asked to do this now, you know, in the middle of hurricanes, a pandemic, wildfires, civil and political unrest. I thank you for getting for giving me this month in particular. The other thing that I thought, by the way, was interesting about this, as the program committee was working with me setting this up, I was on the road or something, and Mitch said to me, oh, Paul, it'd be nice if we could get a picture of you, you know, to put in the notice. And I was traveling. I said, well, I don't know if I can download something for you or anything. He said, don't worry, I'm sure we can just find something off the internet. And so they did find something. Evidently, they found my high school yearbook and pulled my picture from my junior prom. So if any of you who don't know me were like expecting this guy with no gray hair and everything, and you're horrified at the actual image of me, I don't blame you at all. I was kind of horrified when I saw that photo as well. Well, look, as Joyce said, a lot of you do know me from my time at Center for Creative Leadership. And I was there from 1999 to 2006. And among some of the other things I did there, kind of, you know, ironic or maybe even unfortunate on one level is evidently the only thing that I'm actually still remembered for. If I run into someone that worked with me at CCL, and I've been gone now 14 years, if I run into someone, invariably, the first thing they say to me is, oh my God, I really missed those off-center shows. Apparently, nobody missed me for my training, for my work in custom or open enrollment or the coaching or the feedback, but evidently they missed the off-center programs. And for those of you who don't know what those were, that was just kind of a comedy show, if you will, kind of in a late night comedy format that I did along primarily with Al Calardo. And those ran for about quarterly for several years. And so evidently that's all anybody can remember about me. And then, and then 14 years ago, went out on my own to start Good Works Consulting. And then here we are. One of the other things I said in the introduction here, or as we put out this email, I said, you know, using humor in coaching, no laughing matter. And then, as is typical of me, I had Mitch and the program committee put a little smart ass comment in the email flyer that said something like, and you don't have to be funny or have any sense of humor whatsoever to attend the workshop here today. And so I thought, actually, we would test that hypothesis and see. I'm going to have Wanda put out a little poll question. And I actually would like you to take this seriously because there is a purpose to it. And the question is, of course, people who know me well would say that I am funny. So take a second and answer the poll question.
Looks like we have 31 of 42, so give it a few more seconds before I end the poll.
Yeah, now remember, it is anonymous, so we won't know who said what here.
All right, we're at 76% voted. Come on, folks, we can do better than the national poll. We can
Come on.
we can do this. 80% of you are voted now. Another second or two. Going once, going twice. All right. Now we'll share the results.
Okay. So people who know me would say that I am funny. 18% strongly agree, 44% say somewhat agree, 29% neutral, uncertain. Some disagrees and strongly disagrees. Well, that's terrific. Look, the reason why this is important, we're going to talk about using humor in coaching. And one of the things that I'm going to say, and I'll say again, is you actually don't need to be funny to use humor in coaching. And we're going to talk about how that's very possible. So the good news is, for those of you who are, feel that this is natural or easy for you and you strongly agree, terrific, welcome. And if you don't, you've got nothing to worry about. I also wanted to talk today about why use humor in coaching. And let me do this. Okay. For those of you who are comfortable with this and you use humor in coaching, I think there's still a couple reasons to talk about why this might be useful, right? And there's a great quote from Mark Twain, and Twain says, humor is the good-natured side of truth. And ultimately, that to me is what this is about today and what this tool is about today that I want to show you and work with you about. It's about how can we use humor to kind of get at truth. And as you know, there's a lot of truth in humor. And if humor is used well and appropriate, it can really help us coaches and the people we work with dig to deeper and deeper truths. And why is that? Well, it engages both our cognitions and emotions, right? A good joke or humor triggers, it should make you think, right? People go, and sometimes people don't get it. They go, I don't get the joke. But if they get it, it triggers the cognition and it triggers emotion. Laughter, the most obvious one, but also some joy or happiness or even intrigue. And when those emotions and the cognitions work together, I think we've got a really powerful tool or mechanism in which to engage our clients. Obviously, humor can put people at ease and help to lower defense mechanisms. And in that way, I think particularly working with coachees, my experience has been with humor and using this tool, is that's one of the really key things about humor, particularly when you have a client who's stuck, maybe reluctant or hesitant around feedback or the coaching process, or is having a tough time despite the very good job we may be doing, getting insight and making connection. And they just need to lower that defense mechanism a little bit. And so because of all of that, I believe, and I've seen it, it can facilitate self-awareness and learning. It truly, cartoons and humor help people learn more about who they are and helps aid in their growth and development. The other funny thing about humor, and I'm going to say this more later, is how long it tends to stay in our memory. And I'm going to give you an example in a minute when I talk about some of my experience with CCL, but truthfully, very funny back to off center. It's crazy to me that I've been gone for 14 years, and I promise you there are people who still remember a specific joke I told in one of those off center episodes, a specific story or a clip, whatever I did, they still remember the humor. As offensive as it was at times, that's what stuck in people's memories. And I thought, that's really powerful. They have no recollection of me as such, but they'll remember kind of a joke that I left behind. Poll question number 2. Poll question number 2. I use humor in my coaching practice in a regular or intentional way. I use humor in a regular or intentional way. Take a second and answer that.
You guys are getting better at this. We're at 75% already. 34 of 45 of you. Give a couple more seconds before I end the poll. Looks like we have stopped voting, so here are the results. So Paul, did you stop sharing your screen?
Okay. Yeah, I'm changing a stream view. So yes, but don't worry, we're going to get back here in a second. Okay. Let me look at these poll results. I use humor in my coaching practice in a regular or intentional way. Wow. 21% of my eyesight is good. Strongly agree. Somewhat agree. 40. Okay, just go to
Looks
these.
like 5 are neutral or unsure, 5 somewhat disagree, and 3 strongly disagree. So the winner on that is somewhat agree.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, can you all, someone give me a thumbs up. Can you see my screen again?
Yes, you're good.
Good, fantastic. Okay. So actually, look, and here I am actually not being a smart ass. I'm surprised at these results and pleased and encouraged by them on one level that for many of you, this is very natural and fluid, right? That you already use humor in an intentional or systematic way. Again, for those of you who don't, why I wanted to do these 2 polls is I find for many people, these 2 polls are related. People say, well, the reason why I don't use humor in my coaching practice is because I'm not funny. Or people don't describe me as funny. And so therefore, I can't use or I shouldn't use humor in an intentional or systematic way. So when I talk about using humor in coaching, again, this is not about just making an off-the-cuff quip or coming up with a witty moment in coaching or some banter or repartee with our coachees. I'm talking about integrating it in a systematic and intentional way. And that's what this tool that I'm about to show you does. I want to give you a little bit of background about the tool. Well, let me talk about today's objectives. This is stuff you already know, right? Learn how to use it effectively, appropriate, and with intentionality in coaching conversations. Spoiler alert, this is going to be very easy for you, I promise. And the reason why it's going to be easy, you are all seasoned coaches. I'm going to be honest with you, there's nothing I'm going to talk about today that's complex or difficult by any stretch whatsoever. So using it and being comfortable with it, I guarantee you're going to step right into it with no problem. I'm going to actually talk about a way you can use the cartoons as a diagnostic. I know for diagnostics, many of us use personality profiles and 360s and this kind of thing. You can actually use cartoons for that as well. So we'll talk about that briefly. And of course, talk about the process or methodology to use cartoons in different coaching contexts. And by that, I mean individual one-on-one coaching, which a lot of us, most of us do, but also working with teams and groups. So if you do any team or group coaching, this methodology is robust to that. And what I call organizational coaching, which is a bit of a misnomer, but I'm more talking about when you're working with very big groups, disparate groups. If you think about an open enrollment environment, almost in an LDP kind of setting or class, right? So those are the different contexts that cartoons can be used in, and I'm going to talk a little bit about each one. Okay, so how did this all come about anyway? Very high level history class for you here. As you know, I was with Center for Creative Leadership, and the Center for Creative Leadership, among the many cool things that they did, and I was thankful and appreciative about having a professional affiliation with them and still do, is their Explorer series. And I would love in the chat box, if you could, just say whether you have used any of these tools at all in your experience as a coach, any of them at all. I want to track it a little bit here. I'm going to assume we're going to have a lot of yeses. There's a no, couple no's, couple no's. Yes, 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 some no's. Visual Explorer and Values Explorer, especially yes, the visual and values. Not with intentionality, lots of yeses. Okay, good. Keep going. That's very helpful for me to see. So lots of yeses, some no's, some say without intentionality. I made if you've used these tools before, making the connection to what I'm going to talk about today is very easy. And if you haven't, I promise you the process is still very simple. Visual Explorer, for those of you who use it, I intentionally made that the biggest one here on this graphic because I think it's the one that's probably the most well-known, most utilized, most popular part of the CCL's Explorer series. And essentially what it is, it uses visual imagery. And those images could be of anything, a car wreck, a deer run over on the side of the road, or someone jumping out of an airplane. And incredibly simply, with apologies to CCL because it's much deeper and better than this, but look, incredibly simply, you have someone look at the picture and you give them a trigger question and you simply say, or look at many pictures and say, pick out a picture that is symbolic or representational for you of a key leadership challenge, for example. So you give them a trigger question, you give them a framing question, and they look at a picture or pictures, and they try to find something in that picture that speaks to or is a visual representation of the trigger question. Again, it may typically be a key leadership challenge, a struggle you're having as a leader. You can use Visual Explorer, right, for teams and groups. Hey, you could say to a group of people, pick out a picture, come to consensus about a picture that speaks to or represents a key aspect or element of your team or group dynamic. And the people around the table could look at all the pictures and begin to select some, and they vote on them and everything. But the picture becomes the representation, becomes the symbolism, if you will. The other Explorer cards do the same thing. Metaphor Explorer uses metaphors. Visual Explorer uses pictures. And Metaphor Explorer, there may be a metaphor like beasts of burden or gold diggers. And you may give that to a team or group and say, hey, what's a metaphor for how you think your team might be perceived in this organization? And via the use of the metaphor, the team begins to deepen dialogue, deepen connection, understand more around how they're perceived. And then the coach uses those tools to help the client, the coach, the individual coachee, the team, the organization, to gain insight, awareness, and application. And the other Explorer series do the same things with, again, some different methodology. Wisdom Explorer has wisdom in quotes, and Values Explorer has values, and so forth. But they all are common in their methodology around this physical card sort and using different modalities to help people gain awareness and connection from what's here to something else, to their leadership challenges. And I was always incredibly impressed, truthfully. I've used every one of these in Explore series, and I've always been impressed, again, how much this lands and stays in people's memories. And for those of you who use these tools, I'm sure you've had this experience. You've run into someone who you used Visual Explorer with 5, 10, 15 years ago. And if you start talking about the program or the coaching, whatever, I promise you, if you say to them, hey, do you remember the visual, did we use Visual Explorer? Yeah. Do you remember the picture you picked out? And it's remarkable to me, honestly, like off center, I talked to clients who sat in week-long programs with me, week-long programs. They can barely remember me. Well, I don't blame them given how much I've aged since my junior prom, but they can barely remember me, barely remember the program or the content, but they remember their Visual Explorer picture. They'll remember their Metaphor Explorer picture. They'll remember doing the value sort. And I always thought, God, that is so powerful. And so, hence, my experience with those tools led me to create this thing called Thus Funny Business was born, which was originally named Humor Explorer. Because the intent of this deck of cards was supposed to be, and is in the spirit of that Explorer series. Now you may say, well, Paul, by the way, why did you not keep the name Humor Explorer? Well, because after talking to many patent and copyright attorneys, they said if I did, the joke would have ended up to be on me. So we're going with Funny Business. And what it is, like those other tools, it's a deck, in this case, of 100 professionally curated, one-paneled, business-themed cartoons depicting more than 60 common work-related topics. So like those other tools, it just comes in a deck. And when I say professionally curated, what I mean by that is not just me, I had some help, and I'm going to talk about that. But these cartoons were selected with intentionality from thousands and thousands and thousands of cartoons. They were not just picked out randomly. I'll talk a little bit about how I got help doing that. They depict more than 60 common work-related topics. I'll get into that in a minute. And here's the crazy thing. I've had my clients who are using this deck have had success with it, but what I've been hearing the last 8 months is, Paul, I'm not meeting with people face-to-face anymore. I'm not doing programmatic work. I'm not meeting with teams. I'm not going on site. And they wanted to know if they could scan in these cards to use electronically, and back to the lawyers, the short answer is no, not really. So we created an electronic deck. So now this deck exists, and CCL has done something analogous, right? Their tools are now online. So there's a hard copy deck and there's a virtual deck as well. Okay, so that's a little bit about how it came about, how it was born. So I owe CCL a big debt of thanks. The tool itself, like the Explorer series, is nothing more than trying to create a mechanism to create catalytic conversations. Catalytic conversations. And so the goal or the objective is to say, how do we use this mechanism, again, to do those things that we said humor can do in learning around deepen self-awareness and stay in memory and trigger the cognitions and the emotions, but ultimately it's a catalyst, as those other Explorer tools are. And again, as I've said, this deck is robust and can be used for individual, team, and group in the broader organizational context settings as well. Here's one of them. Here's the first card in the deck. Your fear of being publicly exposed as a fraud is a stress-related disorder called imposter syndrome. It's common among people in high-profile authority positions and, of course, inactual phonies like you. I would like someone to unmute, or many of you unmute, and tell me how, very high level, we haven't even talked about it yet. How or in what context could this card ever be used with a coaching client? And just give me a volunteer. Someone raise their hand, or Wanda, if you can manage that and call on somebody. Or
This group is not shy about jumping in there. So
yeah, I know. Well, go pick somebody for me.
Joyce White just unmuted. So
Oh,
Joyce,
great. Oh, hey, Joyce.
Hey, Paul. So I'm jumping in not to answer your question.
Uh-huh.
Say it made me laugh. And if I were you, as funny as you are, with a virtual audience not laughing, it'd be really hard to continue. So just know you've got laughter going on in Lexington, North Carolina, and I will now unmute.
Okay, thank you. So let me hear from someone. In what possible way would you ever use this with a client? Very high level, before we get into it, how I think it could be used.
I'll come back in.
Okay.
and you muted.
Am
wait,
I muted or unmuted?
You're unmuted now. Good.
So I would say that this imposter syndrome is so typical of so many of our clients who've moved so high, and so lightening it up, I can just see that this would just level the playing field with the laughter with dozens of people I've worked with.
Okay, good. Who else? Just give me some more just comment or reaction. This is, by the way, the first cartoon in the deck of 100 cartoons. This is card number 1.
Paul, my reaction is really a mixed one, and that's why I've been holding back with it. That as Joyce White just suggested, I do think we work with so many people who have this imposter syndrome going on, and of course their worst fear is that they are a phony. So with the tagline being, of course, an actual phonies like you, then I think I would have to, as the coach, say, well, not really you, because you're not really a phony. So I'm mixed about the utility of it, Paul.
Well, and Paul, can I piggyback on what Joyce just said? This is Michelle. I was wondering in general, even coming into this meeting, which I would love to use humor, and in all disclosure, I am one of that 3% that strongly disagreed that, you know, my friends or anybody that knew me would think that I was funny. But I came into this really wanting to learn, and I love the idea of using humor and lightening things up. But I work in the field of mental health, and I'd like to use humor, but offending or being tasteless or inappropriate is a concern. And so even though I can see the humor in this, and I think Joyce's reaction and conflict speaks to that, wait, you might really, you know, trigger somebody.
Good. And so I'm going to talk about what's in these cartoons, and yes, still using our judgment about what client and what context and what environment are they appropriate, right? Because ultimately, using humor, we don't want to offend, we don't want to insult. And so let me talk about what's embedded in every cartoon. And I think if you see, well, with the intentionality of how they were picked, it may make more sense around, okay, what's an environment and context that it can be used constructively and usefully.
Could I add one more thought, Paul, before you do that? Okay, because this to me was also kind of on the balancing side of the other comments, which I appreciate and see the points to also, is that for some people, initially coaching seems very daunting and people wonder if it's like therapy. So this context of this cartoon being obviously someone lying on a couch, the ancient image of therapy from the 60s, you know, kind of helps level people's anxiety about, well, of course, coaching is not like therapy. We're not going to dive deep and ask you about your relationship with your mother. So in a way, you've already kind of unspokenly erased that fear in a way, if people are ready to see that, so that the whole thing is obviously a joke, because your coach is not going to sit there and, psychoanalyze you. So in a sense, to me, that sort of neutralized my anxiety about that last line.
Paul,
Sue, by the way, you anticipated my next several slides.
Paul, you've got one more hand raised. Barbara,
Okay, good. Who is it?
ready to speak.
Yep.
Hi, Paul. It's Barbara. My reaction to the cartoon was a little bit different. One of the things that I do with a lot of my coachees is try and explain to them that while our coaching will be customized, they probably do not have unique concerns or issues. And so the fact that there's a cartoon about people being worried about being frauds or, imposters or usually I say if there's a book about it or there's so many different things out there about this topic, you obviously are not the only person who's ever thought this. And so that was my reaction to the cartoon is how you would use it. I would never just put something like this down in front of somebody and let them interpret it themselves and go to the idea that I'm suggesting that they are an actual phony. I would use it to say, look, it's such a common thing that we're getting ready to talk about that there are cartoons and books and articles about it. So that was sort of my reaction to it.
Well, Barbara, you also stole some of my slides coming up as well, right? So yeah, humor is about the universality of the human condition. And so what's embedded in these slides is indeed an element or aspect of that, as Barbara said. Look, if you're feeling this or experiencing this thing, it's likely very common. And in fact, again, we'll talk about, and let me stop talking about what I'm going to talk about and just get to it. When I said these were professionally curated, I had some help, and I asked, who the heck is this character? And I'm going to bet a buck, maybe, that none of you recognize this person. And if you don't, that's okay. His face is not necessarily that well known, so I'll tell you who he is. His name is Bob Mankoff, and Bob Mankoff was that name still may not be very familiar with you. Bob Mankoff was the editor-in-chief of the New Yorker cartoons for over 20 years. And if any of you have seen New Yorker cartoons or read them, you know they're quite iconic, if you will. And getting a cartoon published in the New Yorker is quite an achievement for people who do that. And by the way, the New Yorker gets like over 1,000, when Bob was there, over 1,000 cartoons a week. And he's got to pick 16 or 17 to go into the magazine. But I found Bob through the internet and we connected and all this. He didn't know me from Adam, and we got talking and developed a bit of a rapport, professional connection, and he's been incredibly helpful. In fact, Bob he's been featured on 60 Minutes. He has a TED Talk out there. He's quite knowledgeable about this field. Very genius, also a little bit quirky. Don't tell him that if he watches the recording of this, but just a great guy to talk to. And if none of this still rings familiar to you, you may have seen Bob's most well-known cartoon. No, Thursday's out. How about never? Is never good for you? And Bob said that's his most well-published cartoon. It's literally all over the globe right now. And I'm going to talk about some of the things Bob told me about making a good cartoon and to talk about what's in this deck. By the way, Bob was a psychology major. And again, so he likes to poke fun at the therapeutic process. And here was another one. I wanted you to see the picture first before I show you the caption. So here we are back in a therapist's office, and the therapist is tugging on the patient's ear. Now, we can get all those repressed memories out the easy way or the hard way. And this one is definitely not appropriate for coaching, and it's not in the deck. I just want you to know how quirky Bob Mankoff is.
Paul, I just wanted to share with you that they've got a couple of people who I see are unmuted. I'm not unmuted, and I'm not sure if they're wanting to share.
Oh, okay, sure.
Jamie and Karen
Uh-huh.
and Beth. Oh, Beth remuted. Was there someone who wanted to speak? Okay, you're back on.
Okay. I want to talk about how to find the right cartoon for two reasons. One, you may say, well, Paul, I don't mind using cartoons, but I don't want to use yours, or I don't want to use your deck. And I think that's terrific. And so you can really create your own deck and use your own cartoons. I want to talk to you about how to do that. But secondly, even if you don't want to do it, if you understand a bit about what goes into picking the right cartoon, I think it'll help you be more effective on knowing how to use it as a coach and what to look for in that cartoon, sometimes deeper and beyond the initial image or the initial caption, as even we saw in that last one, right? We may have an initial reaction to it and go, oh, wait a minute, there may be some things deeper here. So Mankoff was very helpful in this. And when he heard what I was trying to do, says, well, look, there needs to be a playful incongruity or a benign violation in these cartoons. And by playful incongruity, he means just that. If you think about a Venn diagram, where does playfulness and incongruity or benign and violation not in the way we may think of that term as people with behavioral science backgrounds, but just, oh, that bit of, ooh, that does make me slightly uncomfortable. The cartoon actually should trigger slight discomfort. As we always say with people, learning comes through discomfort. And if there's not an incongruity or a bit of this benign, harmless violation, something has to not be right with the picture or right with the cartoon in order for the learning to occur. When I said, I went through thousands and thousands of cartoons, there's lots of cartoons out there that are just hysterically, funny, but there wasn't necessarily an incongruity in them. There wasn't something that would actually cause some deeper reflection. So he says that's really the first element that you need. This one is very important. It doesn't necessarily need to be ha ha funny, but it must be aha funny. And I found that was really true in going through these cartoons. Most of them, well, if you look at them, you may laugh, you may have that belly laugh, but many of them not. You just may go, oh, I get it, or I see that, or I understand there's something deeper going on here. And that's really the hallmark of a good cartoon. It's not really, ironically, don't laugh, it's not about the laughter. The goal of using cartoons and humor in coaching is not to get people to laugh. It's to do what we do as coaches, is to lead to insight and learning and depth and connecting and putting something in the middle, like a visual explorer, to create a catalytic conversation. That's what the cartoon's meant to do. And the joke has to be on you, or in this case, our client. And I know what some of you are thinking, like, oh my God, Paul, you're saying that I should use a cartoon that's gonna insult or offend or make my client the brunt of a joke? No, what I'm saying is if you find the right cartoon and you use it at the right time with the right client, it's the playful incongruity or the benign violation that will cause your client to see themselves in that cartoon. By the way, there's 100 cartoons in this deck. Not every client is going to see themselves in every cartoon. I intentionally started with that first one the way I did, because I knew there was going to be a bit of both sides of that equation. And I'm like, wow, is that one really appropriate? I would never use it for my clients, right? Exactly. Then for your population or for your clients, that you don't want the joke that's on them is to be offensive. You want the joke that's on them is they see themselves in it in a playful, incongruous way. And so in trying to select these cartoons, in fact, Mankoff calls it the hedonic tone of the cartoon. They shouldn't be threatening or offensive or intimidating, but they also can't be so lame and benign that there's no tension, right? If you think about a visual explorer image, people pick that up because they saw, obviously, themselves in it, or they saw their team or their group or their organization in it. And you think again about the visual, for those of you who use Visual Explorer, I mean, I wasn't making this up, right? There is literally a picture of roadkill, of a deer run over on the side of the road. is that an offensive picture? Or if you're a hunter, or if you love animals, could you get offended at that picture? Sure, you could. But you would hope then, if you really knew that about the client, that they were, loved animals and deers, don't use that picture. But the picture itself just has a bit of that, oh, that makes me think. I see something in that is triggering something for me right now. I feel like roadkill on the side of the road when I show up to my, my organization. Oh, okay. That's the connection. Now, in that case, again, metaphor explorer, visual explorer, values explorers, you want to see the metaphor, the image, the value that's you're projecting onto yourself. In this case, the cartoon, the joke, you should see yourself in it when it works. By the way, if your client looks at some of these cartoons and it doesn't work, it's just like 100 visual explorer images. They may look at 95 of them and they don't work, and that's okay. So they don't all work, and they're not intended to work for all people at all times. And the last thing is actually pretty important. It needs a reasonable connection to business or the workplace. It needs a reasonable connection. Not all of these cartoons are set strictly in a business context or in a business environment, but there needs to be a connection, a nexus. Is what's being depicted in the cartoon, can you make an inference, a connection, an insight? Can you create a catalytic conversation about something that could be going on for your client at work, as a leader, as a boss, as a member of a team, as someone stuck in a bureaucracy or a hierarchy, someone who's struggling in a particular organizational culture? What is the connection back to work? And so ultimately, right, if you think about what we do as coaches, you'll see it in this, again, very simple model. So you guys use it every day. It's this notion of, right, awareness, insight, and this connection and application back to work. Let me pause here, Wanda, so you can see if anybody has any questions or comments, or if there's anything in the chat box anybody wants me to comment on.
Yeah, Wanda,
Yes.
I would like to say one thing if I could.
Right.
Paul, when I saw the first cartoon, my reaction was a little different from everybody else. It's my client saying that's how I experience my boss or my work team. And I see that, of course, I use all of the Explorer series, but if they could pick out something, pick out a card that you experience with your boss, with your work team, with the things that you do, whatever it may be, and they pick that card, that gives us something to talk about. This is your perspective of your work team, your boss, or whatever.
Ralph, extraordinarily well done. I really mean that. Look, again, you guys are stealing all my material. So let me steal some of my own material. Ralph, that's one of the questions I ask people when they look at this cartoon. You'll see it on a slide to come. Are you the protagonist in this? Are you the antagonist in this? Instead of a therapist, who is that? So if you feel violated by the cartoon, is there someone at work who plays that role kind of like therapist for you that you think they're secretly thinking that about you? You're exactly on the right track. It's around taking that cartoon and asking the right framing and probing questions to get at the underlying truth that should be embedded in that cartoon. And the truth is, there's an incongruity in there. This is fantastic. Hold on, we're right there. Well, let me pause again before I do that. Any other comment or insight or anything or questions so far about what I said about what's embedded in these cartoons?
Good morning, Paul. We just met this morning, and the point I would want to make is it's important to have the rapport or the respect or the connection with the person or the client. Joyce had introduced you in very gracious terms, Joyce Richmond. And, the way that I'm taking you in this morning is that you're an edgy guy. You like being on the edge in the way that you hold yourself. And I was ready to sign off because I really wasn't enjoying that this morning. And then Joyce White came in with some comments that made me feel like, well, Joyce likes Paul and Joyce likes Paul. So let me give this just a minute more. And so the point there is, I think you would be very choiceful at what point you provoke that response, where you put the edge in the conversation.
Tom, thank you. And in fact, I'm going to talk about, when I talk about using this, so, but thank you again. And really quickly, these cartoons can be used pre-coaching, they can be used in the moment, and they can be used post-coaching as a summary or a wrap-up or something that was triggered for you as a coach that you had tough time articulating in the moment. So it's not uncommon to me. I will send a cartoon to somebody after a coaching session and say, you know what, our conversation today, I actually saw some of what I think is going on in this cartoon. Let's talk about it in our next call. But Tom, you're absolutely right. This is again where I still hope people use, as you all do, we all have to use professional judgment in all the tools we use, right? About the timing and the spacing and the space and the mental room people need to utilize this. Really good. The other thing, if you're going to create your own cards, is I recommend categorizing them by certain themes and issues, because if you're going to use them in coaching, again, you better be aware of what that cartoon is intended to teach, is intended to talk about, right? And so it turns out, by the way, the 100 cards in this deck that I use, all 60 or 61 of these themes are embedded in those cartoons. Now, clearly, some cartoons embed more than one theme. But the reason why this is important, if you're going to use it, you need a clear understanding of what are you trying to get, what's the insight, what's the learning? What are you trying to help the client see or understand or be catalytic about through this mechanism? And so as I was developing my deck, I was very conscious around, was I getting to themes and issues that I use when I coach people? And then how could those cartoons be useful in that way? Now, you'll notice looking at this list, by the way, you go, well, Paul, mission statements? Why the heck, how do you coach someone about mission statements? I have never coached an individual about a mission statement, but I've coached teams and groups about them, and I've worked with organizations who are trying to write or refine or revise their mission statement. And this is what I said, this deck, not all the cards in here, by the way, will be used even for in an individual coaching context. So some of these issues are much more germane to individuals, right? Some more to teams and groups, and some to broader organizations. And I'm going to talk about how, at least on this deck, you can make sense of that pretty quickly. But take a look at these issues, right? And now for fun, and again, some of you already stole my material. Now let's go back to this cartoon. Let's go back to this cartoon. And if I were to say to you, okay, given this cartoon, why do you think I put it in my deck? What themes and issues could be that this cartoon could be used for? What would you say? Either raise your hand or Wanda, or put it in chat, but I want to hear from some people. What does that cartoon that we looked at, tell me the themes?
Leadership bosses.
Leadership and bosses, absolutely. Keep going.
Downsizing and reorgs.
Could be downsizing and reorgs. Thank you. Keep going.
Obviously, imposter syndrome.
Gold star there, right. Certainly imposter syndrome.
Leadership bosses.
Leadership and bosses, very good. Give me one
Identity
more.
and meaning.
What is it?
Identity and meaning.
Very good, very good. Yeah, identity and meaning.
How about risk?
Well, it could be more. For whatever this is worth, when I did this and working with colleagues, this is the sort we came up with. That we said, hey, we think that these are the 5 most significant ones. It could also be risk, right? So I know when I'm coaching someone around any of these issues, so like, again, people look at this and they go, well, what does it have to do with feedback? Well, here's an interesting thing. Think about, I use this slide, this cartoon, when I'm working with coachees who I've heard or know that they're actually reluctant or hesitant to work with me. Why? What's the playful incongruity here? The playful incongruity says I sought out a professional for advice and help. And you know what? This is my biggest fear, is that you secretly are going to agree with something negative about me. And so my fear, this is why I don't want to work with a coach, Paul, and this is why I don't want to work with a professional, is because this is a doubt or a fear or concern that I have. By the way, what does this also have to do with feedback? I have used this, and Tom, to your point, so I'm having a relationship with a client, we've done some diagnostics, they're about to get their 360 back. And I'll say, hey, before we look at that and again, I know this person's been resistant all along the way. So I may say, hey, Bob, do you mind if I show you a cartoon? Actually, before we talk about our 360, because I like cartoons. I think that there might be something useful in here. And I'll tell you more about framing questions. So I do a better job than that, hopefully, in a moment. But I'll show them this cartoon. Right? And I'll say, Bob, what do you think? And, you know, maybe they get it, maybe they don't, we talk about it a bit, but the point I'm trying to make is what I finally try to get them around to is to say, are you going to risk feeling any of this when we look at your 360? That you're going to be, quote, exposed? And if not, to me, do you have any concern about what I'm going to see on your 360? Or more importantly, who instead of a therapist, Bob, who is that therapist for you at work? Who do you think at work secretly does maybe think something bad about you? And by the way, is it going to reinforce something bad for you if you open up your 360 and see that? Bob, how is this dynamic either maybe playing out with you and me, or is this dynamic going to play out as we review your 360? And oh, by the way, sometimes, believe it or not, we stopped and never got to the 360 because we spent the rest of the session talking about imposter syndrome. And then to the point made earlier, I go, it's okay, they make cartoons about it because we all feel that, including me, Paul. And I tell them that, and that is true. And so used in that way, the cartoon then again becomes the catalyst to move on, to find the playful incongruity, but to know in your mind as a coach, this is why I'm showing this particular cartoon. I want to do one of the things here, imposter syndrome, authenticity, whatever it is. I want to do that. And so I use the cartoon. Now you may be going, okay, Paul, great, but how do I know which cartoons are for which? In the deck that I use, and you would have access to, of course, a topical cross-reference table by card number. So all of those 100 cartoons are now sorted by those 60 topics. And so if you go, hey, I'm dealing with a group, and we're going to talk about diversity and inclusion, the last one on the graphic. You know, cards 7, 12, 25, etc. are the cards you can pull out of the deck very quickly to have a smaller stack to use when you're talking about D&I issues. And same thing with any of these. Now you go, well, Paul, God, that's still an awful lot of cards I'd have to pull out. Well, not really, because it turns out the cards are also sorted within the deck in a way that cards numbers 1 through 30 are primarily used in individual coaching contexts. And cards 31 through 100 are used for teams, groups, and organizations. So if you say, boy, I think the person I'm coaching is having a tough time with conflict, doesn't deal well with conflict, struggles with conflict. And I see it in some of their data, I see it in some of their assessments. I'm wondering if I could find an appropriate, useful cartoon that may help trigger a deeper, more meaningful conversation on conflict as it more applies to an individual. So not conflict because I'm working for a crappy organization, right? But individual conflict. Well, highlighted in red are all those cards that are number 30 or less, because those are the ones individual coaches would probably most benefit from. So again, knowing what you're trying to accomplish by theme, if you're in an individual coaching context, which again, I'm assuming most of you are, shorten the deck and just use cards number 1 through 30, and then go to your cross-reference table. Right? Now you go, well, that all still sounds like an awful lot of work. It's actually not. Once you use the deck a few times, you'll know, oh my God, it's only 30 cards. Card number 17, I knows about this, and I know, and I'm sitting here with a client in the moment, it's honestly not that hard. You'll get to know these 30 cards really well if you use this. Okay, let me pause again. Questions, comments, again, just about how this deck is used, how it's sorted, and ways in which it could be used, hopefully much easier.
How would I use this as an academic coach of kids and adults with special needs?
Here's my honest answer.
They would
Great question. I have no idea.
Okay.
And the reason, no, and here's the, because I don't have that expertise or background as a coach or my academic training. I'm an industrial psychologist. And secondarily, the deck was not designed with those populations in mind. And so I don't know the answer to that. If some of you work in those populations, and I mean this, and you attempt to use this, and whether you're having success or not, I'd love that feedback. And or I'd be happy to work with folks. Well, can we design this kind of methodology and find cartoons that are more germane to that population?
Thank you for your honesty. And my question would be then, where do I look to find those that would appeal to my clientele?
Well, there you go. So let me pause on that. And then any other questions about this? And I'm going to address that question in a couple others. Anything in the chat box? Everybody good? Okay. So in terms of where you find cartoons and how you use them, one, you can find them where we typically find them, right? Online and newspapers and magazines, whatever. There are cartoon clearinghouses, and I don't want to spend time on that today, but I'm more than happy to work with you folks who want to do this. But you would go to these clearinghouses and these databases of cartoons, and that's where, like I did, you would search through thousands and thousands and thousands of cartoons because their search engines are very archaic, and you still got to find the cartoons that meet those criteria. But you can do that. Keep in mind, and when you do that, the other hurdle is this. Don't forget about getting copyright permissions. It's not a multiverse, it's a copyright violation. So if you're gonna use cartoons in coaching, you do need to pay for them. I paid for them. I paid dearly for them, by the way, to get permission to use 100 different cartoons from different publishers and cartoonists. And by the way, I had to pay again when I wanted to create the deck virtually. And so if you're going to create your own cartoons in these clearinghouses, you have to find who owns it and the author of the cartoon. Then you have to tell them how you're using it and where you're using it, and globally, internationally, one time online, commercial. Now, there's all kinds of rules. And then you tell them how you plan on using it, and then you pay a fee for that. And by the way, the fee's a whole lot more if you plan on using it what's called indefinite use versus one-time use. And I'm assuming if you're going to put a deck together, it's because you want to use it more than once, so you're going to pay a lot higher fee to do that. So yes, you can do it, but this is a step you can't leave out. And I'm happy to talk to folks about how to manage that. Okay, all right, here we go. Now, finally, the moment you've been waiting for is using the funny business deck to coach individuals. And I said, this is incredibly easy, even if you haven't used CCL's Explorer series tools, because this is and you can adopt this methodology or the language, but it's so intuitive, it's almost embarrassing to present to a bunch of very seasoned coaches, but that won't stop me, so here we go. Similar to the Explorer tools, what do? We've already been doing that this morning. You find a cartoon and you ask a framing question. You follow up with open-ended or probing questions, and then you look for themes and patterns and help the client make connections back to work. Right? It's the same process kind of with any of those tools, or a process you probably do with people's assessments. Oh, hey, I'm looking at your Myers-Briggs. I'm wondering about this. Tell me more about this. Here's a theme or pattern I see in a connection back to work. It's stuff that you all do every day. We all do every day. So it's actually not that, I don't consider that difficult if you're a coach with some experience. Now, there's a couple ways you can still use a deck with individuals. I'm going to talk about how to use it as a diagnostic later on. But like Visual Explorer, as I said, you could use this in the middle of a coaching session where you pull out a card and you go, typically from that 1 through 30, you go, oh, okay, I want to use this one. And you physically put it in front of the client, or virtually you can send, the virtual deck comes in a literal Dropbox file, and you click on card number 17 and you send it as an email, and you say to your coachee, hey, I'm sending you a cartoon right now, right? So that's a way to do it. Or like Visual Explorer, some of these other things, you could go to the cross-reference thing and go, hey, in today's session, I know I want to talk about feedback. And so I'm going to pull out the cards and have them ready in the session. I got cards, number 7 and 12 and 24, and I'm ready to go, right? And so when I ask a framing question, it's simply whether you're talking about an individual cartoon or cartoons. You just make it plural. So an individual framing question is, well, I'll get to that in a minute, right? But you can do individual or multiple decks. Easy, right? Easy process. So coaching an individual, what are some potential framing questions? And Tom and Ralph and Sue, this is some of what you folks were saying when I was saying, you're stealing some of my material. You'll be pleased to know, because you're all very bright people, I'm not going to read these to you, but I do want to give you a second to look at these. And I know any of you on this call could develop a list way better than this. True, I mean that, but these are just some examples. So give me some thoughts, feedback, reaction to framing questions, or, if another great one pops to mind, yell it out. If you can find people who are either raising their hand or write something in the chat box, just regarding framing questions. Any thoughts, reactions?
Paul, what occurs to me is the inherent value in even being able to create a framing question. So these are wonderful, and my hunch is that as coaches we would do well to understand the very nature of a framing question. Its value of giving the client or the coachee the opportunity to speak to us rather than our telling them what they ought to be thinking about.
Joyce, and I would say too, again, this is why these are examples of framing questions. You all do this all the time, whether you're using a formal methodology like something in the Explorer series or your own coaching. You tend to, I hope, ask framing questions. And so, yes, I would say, how do you bring yourself into this process and know the importance of it? So when some of you said earlier, well, I just wouldn't slap this cartoon down in front of someone. I agree, I wouldn't do that either. You have to be intentional around, here's the theme, here's what I know is embedded in this cartoon, here's what I'm trying to get at. I know this client, I've worked with them, I know the context of the situation. I think it's an appropriate mix now between me, coach, client, and cartoon to now frame it up in a way that is going to be useful.
Well, you're stimulating the contact boundary, right? You're giving somebody something to bump up against.
Well said. Yeah. Yes. Yes. By the way, in my experience with a deck and using these, I'm quite sure I've used all of these questions or derivative ofs. And again, it's a judgment call about knowing, kind of how to get it to land. But I will tell you, even a very generic question about the cartoon tends to work. Like in bullet point 2, do you see yourself in this cartoon in any way? And the person will go, no, not at all. Great. Okay. It's like a VE picture they don't connect with. That's fine. You may say why you as a coach think there's a connection to what they're struggling with or challenged by, whatever, but they don't necessarily have to see it, right? The last block, is there a hidden fear or concern that this cartoon highlights for you? Well, that's one I've used with that imposter syndrome cartoon. Well, yeah, quite honestly, Paul, again, I don't want to feel like that looking at my 360, and I don't want, I didn't want coaching to begin with, because I think like you're going to be there judging me. I've had very good conversations around that cartoon with that question around the hidden fear. Remember the playful incongruity. There's something incongruous there, but it's incongruous enough that it may trigger a learning or an insight. So a framing question is very important. What I did in this next slide, I pulled out some of these framing questions and gave quick examples what follow-up or probing questions could look like if you choose that framing question. And again, I'm not going to read these all to all of you, but Rolf, to your point, do you see yourself in this cartoon? How? As the protagonist, antagonist? If you're not the protagonist or the antagonist, who is? Is it somebody else? I don't see myself in this picture, but I see my boss. Oh, I see my coworker. Right? Okay, well, how do you see them in it? What are the fundamental tensions depicted in these cartoons? Do you feel any of those tensions on your job or at work? Are certain people creating them, or are they more broadly pervasive? How do you reconcile those tensions? So when the cartoon has an incongruity or benign violation, it's a tension. Do they feel that? Do they see it? Is this cartoon, or you put out several, are they true for you personally? Why? How long has that been true? Has it gotten better or worse over time? Do you wish it wasn't true? Explain. Right? I'll give you a second to read those last few, but clearly you get the idea. By the way, I'm sorry, I said I would let you read it, now I lied. The next one about, is there a hidden fear, right? How does it impact you? Is there anything you could do to rewrite the cartoon? So for those of you who go, oh, I don't really like the caption, give your client the opportunity to not like the caption. Okay, well, what should the caption say? What's it saying for you? What are you seeing if you look at it? How would you rewrite it? Well, I think it's really more about this, okay? So given that tension or given that struggle, what, if anything, have you done? Well, nothing. Okay, well, what's stopping you from taking action on that if you're feeling that tension or incongruity, or that's how you rewrite it? I lied again, I'm sorry. The next one, is that theme connected to anything about your personality profiles or 360 feedback results? I find a great time to use cartoons is summarizing themes or patterns I've seen in their data. Now they can agree or disagree, or they may go, man, that's for sure. Yep. Right. So some examples of probing questions. Okay. Questions, comments, thoughts about either follow-up or probing questions and how they work together in this context.
Paul,
Mm-hmm.
the one where it says, how is this true for you personally?
Mm-hmm.
I find that asking them, how do you know that's true, is a really powerful question to get them to really open up about how they know it and what tells them it's true.
Matt, I love the question. I'm going to add it into my list, and I bet you're going to sue me now for a 5-cent royalty fee every time, someone uses that question. No, but seriously, it is a great question, right? How do you know that to be true? Thank you. Good. Who else? Give me some just thoughts or reflections about follow-up and probing questions.
Paul, it looks like you have a comment in the chat box from Jamie. I see the value here in allowing the coachee through selecting a multiple cards to introduce edgy topics in a humorous and non-threatening way, a different tool to find the edge.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Jamie. I actually appreciate you pointing that out, right? Thank you, right? Because if the fear is, wow, I'm going to hand them a cartoon that I think applies to them and I'm going to run the risk of insulting them. To Jamie's point, then let them pick among half dozen that thematically connect for you from the cross-reference sheet, but have them pick, right? So it's the difference between telling someone, hey, this visual explorer image, I think it applies to you, and what do you see here versus, hey, here's 10 VE pictures, you tell me which one you connect with. And again, if you kind of control it at the thematic level, then yes, you can, that's certainly an approach that would be less threatening. I am going to skip this. I was going to have someone who was willing to be coached by me, but in the interest of time, I'm probably going to pass on this. But this was the cartoon that I was going to use. And I had told Joyce Richmond I was going to volunteer her for this. But Joyce, are you there?
I am. I was hiding in that moment. I was.
So Joyce, instead of kind of coaching you on it, but let's sort of talk this through a little bit, maybe. So if I were coaching Joyce, and I was going to use this cartoon, right? Joyce, pressure's on, and you can phone a friend. Why would I even use this cartoon? What again? Theme? What's the benign incongruity in here? In what context would I possibly pull this card out and try to engage with you in dialogue?
Let me cogitate here.
What's the tension?
Oh, I mean, certainly the tension is I want to be seen as doing this correctly or being right or being in charge, and my concern is that those who observe me feel the opposite, and I don't know how to engage them or it. Because then if it's true, I've got nothing.
So Joyce, I hear you saying there's this tension between you kind of want feedback, you want to grow and learn and develop, but secretly there's this bit of a fear of you may be really kind of hurt by it. Is that fair?
I'm afraid of it. I'm afraid of it. So seeking it out is something that I give lip service to, but then I have to clutch when I get it, and I have to really think before I respond to it.
Hey Joyce, in this cartoon, this guy's saying, but what if that guy in the bleachers is right? If I could ask you then, who is that guy in the bleachers for you?
It's no one person. It's representational of any audience that I find myself with.
So it's not an individual, but like this cartoon, it's kind of this amorphous crowd of people that you kind of hear that voice.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
It's the audience. It's no one individual.
In this cartoon too, the character is talking to someone on their team, a trusted person. It looks like, who is that for you? Who do you trust?
I'm sorry, say it again, Paul.
Well, who is someone you can trust to talk and self-disclose and be authentic about with that kind of fear or concern or doubt? Who's that person?
And that there is a person with whom I do that. That's someone that I've known for years, and we've been in the same organization for a very long time. Thank heavens for that person.
Good. So you have someone in the workplace that you're able to do that with. Joyce, we're about to, I said, the point of today, the main part of our time today, we were going to look at your 360 results, right? And I know when we talked in previous sessions, you had at least some concerns about the 360 process. Is this cartoon for you at all applicable about what we're going to do today with your 360? Does it resonate with you?
Paul, I dread it. I dread it. I know that we're going to do it, and I've gotten ready for it, and but I'm afraid it's going to reinforce my greatest fear.
Okay, good, caught. I said I wasn't going to do any coaching, but there it is, right? And Joyce, thank you for playing along. But that's it,
Okay.
right? That's all I mean around some framing questions and some probe questions, and then again, I try to tie it back into, back at work or what we're doing in the session. And that's it. Most use of these cards is just a minute or two. I know VE and some of these other ones, you can go into these big, long, protracted star models. These cartoons, just what you saw. Joyce and I maybe spoke a minute and a half. Okay? So that's it. So today, I want to get you all to Carnegie Hall and give you a chance to practice, practice, practice. And I want you to do with each other in a very small kind of short role play way what Joyce and I basically just did. And the way that I want it to work, or hope it works, is we're going to put you in breakout rooms of groups of 3 people. If you have not downloaded yet the 6 cartoons that were sent to you before, they should be in the chat box now. You can either have them on your screen or you can have hard copy of them, but please go ahead and make sure you have access to those 6 cartoons before going in the breakout room. So you can work on that now. When in the breakout room, again, for experienced people, this is very easy. One person is going to be coach, the other is coachee, the third person is the observer. Of course, in round robin fashion, we'll play all 3 of those roles. When you're the coach, in the coach role, I simply want you to do what I did very quickly with Joyce. Just practice using some framing questions. Try a couple, right? Try some open-ended or probing questions. Help the person make some connections back to the workplace. Now, Joyce is, of course, very savvy and very gracious, and she was a great coachee. I would encourage you, when you're in the coachee role, to do the same. In other words, you could, by the way, you could get real coaching. So you could actually be Joyce Richmond and go, hey, this card really does connect with me in my real life, and I want you, Ralph Mitchell, to coach me as Joyce Richmond, because this does have meaning for me. Or, right, Joyce may go, I'm going to kind of role play it as a composite of people I've coached over the years, as she did with me. And that's fine too, right? By the way, you can, as the coachee, go, well, that cartoon doesn't really connect with me, or I'm not sure I'm seeing. I'm not saying you have to roll over and give your coach a too easy a time, but just try to create some dialogue. So again, with Joyce, when I said, oh, hey, today we're talking about your 360. And so she made that very natural connection. Go, yeah, I do see how that could get in my way today. Okay. So that's it. I just want you to take some ups and take some at-bats. The 6 cartoons, if you've seen them, I'm not going to get into what these connect to and the themes, but they are all from numbers 1 through 30 in the deck. So they're very clearly can be used for individual coaching contexts. And if you had a chance to look at them, and now that you've seen those themes, I bet you could very quickly say, hey, these are the ones that the cartoon is trying to get at. So we got Bert with his fossilization risk. Do I know nothing about leading, or people don't know anything about following? Followed my bliss. Do you think the ladder of success would be straight up? Obviously, these have to do with some, career transition issues and things like that. Right? Your job description, what you can do. Last one, no big shocker, probably has to do with performance reviews, among other things, right? Conflict and whatnot. So you get the idea. So I want you to go to these breakout rooms, and you can do one of 2 things. You can tell your coachee, here's the setup. Your coachee has looked at all 6 of these cartoons, and so maybe one of your trigger questions is, framing questions, hey, Joyce, is there one in particular you want to talk about today? Or you can take the other approach and go, Joyce, we were talking last week about performance reviews, and it triggered me to think about this cartoon, and you can go that way. Either way is fine with me. And Joyce can either be Joyce or be a coachee, it doesn't matter. A composite of a real life person. Okay, So you're all pretty experienced at doing this round robin fashion. Wanda, can you put them in groups of 3? I'm going to give you 15 minutes, so that'll give you some time to kind of set up and figure out the roles in the round robin. It'll give you a bit of time to decide, are you doing the individual cartoon or having the collective? So really, you're going to have just about, 3-4 minutes of actual practice time in the coaching role. And take a couple at bats at it, right? If you kind of get through it, start again. Try a new framing question, try a new probe, try a different cartoon. Just kind of fill up 3 or 4 minutes, just practicing being a coach, getting comfortable with a bit of the methodology. As those are coming in, thank you for that. We will spend a couple minutes talking about this, and I want to also hear from you in a minute around your experience of as the coachee. What was it like kind of having to, even if you were doing it as a kind of a composite character of people you coach, what was it like being asked questions or being asked to reflect and make comments from off of a cartoon? Before we do that, in my learning objectives today, I said I was definitely going to get to a couple things. And so I will loop back with you later to kind of debrief and talk about your experience in the breakout room. But let me quickly do a couple other things that I promised to do. One was, how to use the funny business deck as a diagnostic. And we've really already talked about this process. Selected cards to be reviewed by the client. Again, you're typically going to use an individual coaching cards number 1 through 30. They're generally the more pertinent to the individual coaching situations. So you could pull out those cards. This is one way to do it. You could have the clients look through the cards with an appropriate framing question. Look through the ones, tell me the ones you connect with or speak to you because they somehow relate to your job, boss, team, or work environment. So I say as a diagnostic, you want a pretty broad framing question. What cards do you connect with? What resonates with you? Some of them you may not get, but just go through and read these 30 cards and tell me which ones speak to you because there's a connection for you in some way. Even if you can't articulate it, even if you're not sure about it, you go, there's something true about this, feels true about this cartoon as it applies to me, my boss, my team, or my work environment. You collect the cards back that the client picked from that subset of 30. And then let's say there's 10 or 15 cards. Then go to your cross-reference table, right? I showed you every card is cross-reference and see what themes or patterns emerged. So it may be, again, that lots of them emerged around authenticity or conflict or boss relationship. And where those cartoons kind of what I call puddle or theme together, this can help you identify the coaching topics, the themes, and even make connections back to their personality profiles and 360s. So as a diagnostic, you could do this early in the I've actually done this, don't get nervous when I say this, session 1 with a client. Now by session 1, we've had some preliminary phone calls. We've talked about the goals of coaching. I've talked to them about funny business methodology. I asked conceptually, would they be okay with doing something like that? I know it's a bit non-traditional, on and on. When they told me they would, I gave them the 30 cards and said, okay, great. I gave them these instructions. And we used those cards. And again, I did find themes and patterns that connect not only to the cross-reference tab, but things that I knew they didn't know yet, turned up in their personality profiles. We hadn't run the 360 yet. Which, by the way, is another project for Funny Business down the road. We are trying to get cartoons to connect specifically to the Myers-Briggs types, to connect with all the Hogan HDS profile. In fact, Mainkoff's supposed to be helping me with that as well. So as a diagnostic, again, it's merely getting them to pick from a subset of cartoons and then make the connections to the instruments and the other data that you already have, or again, the themes back to the cross-reference sheet. And again, or you could do that mid-coaching or even at the end of coaching as a wrap-up, right? Hey, are there any cartoons here that are representative of things that, or you bring the deck back? Hey, these were the 10 you picked out early in our coaching process, and 6 months later, do these still resonate with you in the same way? Right? And so it can also be used in that fashion as well. This I'm going to go through incredibly quickly because it's so embarrassingly intuitive. So when using funny business with teams or groups, no shocker. Same process. No shocker, right? you would go to the cross-reference sheet and get the cartoons that pertain to team and group functioning. What if this time more heads has made us more stupid, and the knee-jerk reaction committee, for examples about cartoons that apply to teams, here are two more. I know we didn't accomplish anything, but that's what meetings are for. And a bunch of sheep sitting around the table saying, well, we're well positioned, but we lack leadership. So you take the group or the team cartoons and you find those from the cross-reference table, you put them out on a table in front of your team or group and ask a framing question like this, which is exactly the same as the individual questions. I just stuck in your team instead of you. I told you this was easy. Now, again, there's lots of ways to do this as well. If you're live with a group, I've put out all the cartoons. They can pick publicly. They can actually pick anonymously, right? They can come and tell you which cartoon. I've had people use their iPhone. They text me, oh, Paul, this cartoon, right? And you can compile that data and say, okay, well, out of the 12 of you, 8 of you said the cartoon around the knee-jerk reaction committee is the one that you most resonate with. And so it's still a way people can keep some safety and some anonymity even within a group context. The other thing I will have them do is, hey, out of these team cartoons, I want you to all select 3. We find the 3 most common. And then again, we debrief or discuss them, right? Well, why did these 3 emerge? If I'm coaching an individual who leads a team or a group, maybe the boss, right? And they're responsible for team and group functioning. You can use these cartoons, these team and group cartoons in individual coaching, right? By the way, from 2 lenses, how do you see your team or group functioning? And here's another great framing question I have found. If I were to ask the members on your team to pick a card or a cartoon that's symbolic or representative of your team, what would they likely tell me, right? And so it's this notion of what we always say, helping people move from subject to object in coaching. And so asking people a framing question about how someone else may pick a cartoon to describe the team functioning can be very illuminating. And then of course, your probing questions, again, no big shocker, same thing. I put the framing question and then these are some probes, right? A lot of the team cartoons have to do also with decision making. And so if you go to that cross-reference table, you want cartoons on teams and groups, but also conflict and decision making. So again, what specific examples of decisions has your team made that these cartoons seem to be addressing or pointing to? So for example, people gravitate to the knee-jerk reaction committee. Your probe, your follow, well, what? Give me an example. Why do you think you're the knee-jerk reaction committee? Right? That's the probe, that's the follow-up. Well, how long have you been the knee-jerk reaction committee and what caused that, right? So it's these probing questions, just using that are follow-up from a team or a group frame. Right, okay. So pretty easy. Last one is using funny business with organizations, right? So this is if you've got big groups, kind of open enrollment, or you have 30, 40, 50, 300 people in a room, right? And you want the organization to understand something about itself at the organizational culture level. You can also use these, if you get the electronic deck, you can show it on a PowerPoint to people in the room. They can do a voting thing, a Likert scale of 1 to 7 electronically. They can raise hands. So there's all kinds of ways to use these in bigger group formats. Again, for God's sake, people, do I really need to show that flowchart graphic? Again, it's the same thing. Here are some cartoons that are more germane to organizational functioning. Change management, we thought we'd put in the detail later. We're going to feel some pain today. We're removing that Band-Aid we put on the problem. By the way, that one's a popular favorite at the organizational level. I have found in using it. Turns out lots of organizations do that. Diversity is good. Pass it down, says the senior team of all white guys. And we've reorganized so many times, we are now one of our own subsidiaries. So for teams that are going through a lot of reorgs and change management and things like that, right? So again, you get the idea. There's cartoons, you go to your cross-reference table, you pull out the themes and the ones that have to do with what issue you're trying to work on with that organization. By the way, for example, diversity is good, pass it down, also can be used at the team or group level. Could also be used at the individual level, right? Someone's coaching a team that looks very much like this. So I say roughly those cards are segmented from 1 to 30 and 31 to 100. But the more you use that deck or you get familiar with your own cartoons, you'll realize exactly they're pretty robust and interchangeable. No shocker here. Again, I'll give you 2 minutes. Framing questions for organization. They're the same as individual and team. I just plopped in your company or your organization. You get the idea, right?
Paul, I received
Yes.
a question asking if the framing and probing question pages of your slide will be available to us.
100%. Yep.
All right, so we will make sure that our communications chair, Christine Loeffler, has these to distribute to you.
Yeah, and I'll also give you my cross-reference table. Even if you don't want my deck, that cross-reference table will give you the topics and give you some ways to think about building your own deck.
Okay, great.
In fact, speaking of which, so framing, probing questions, you get the idea with organizations, it's the same. I will also say I've had people using this deck now, obviously in a virtual environment. They said, if you get the electronic deck, or you get your own deck and you pay for the electronic copyrights, you can use them in Zoom meetings, you can put them in PowerPoint shows, you can even post them onto LinkedIn or wherever you want. But again, please know there are copyright issues. And if you're gonna do that, you need or ought to get the copyright permissions to do that. Okay, well, let me put this up here quickly. If you are interested in finding out more about the deck that I have, or interested in getting a copy of either the hard copy of the virtual deck, that's where you would go. But let me go back to here for the moment and say, what questions, comments, reflections, reactions from anything from today and or from the breakout exercise at all? Put it in the chat box, or if you can see people have a question, comment, reaction, reflection from anything today, again, including the breakout time.
So far, you're being called a genius. Talk about humor, huh? Right? No, just kidding. Yeah, that's the word there, genius.
I've been called an evil genius.
This is great.
Well, let me do this very quickly, because I know people have already been very patient online here for a bit. I know many people have other things to do right at 11. So let me do this. I am happy to stay online for as long as people want to today after 11 to take questions, to talk about the deck, to help you if you want to do your own. Like, again, I'll give you more information around cartoon clearinghouses and legal issues, and I want to be a resource. That offer extends beyond today. So if you have to go at 11, you don't have time to stay online, email me, find me at my email address there, and I'll be happy to talk to or work with you in any way to help you find ways to use humor or cartoons more intentionally in your practice. So I'm going to hang around for the rest of you. Here's what I do leave you with. The meeting is over. You can now relax your Zoom face.
Very good. Thank you so much, Paul.
Okay.
And if you can stop share so I can see the group, then we can
Sure.
share that again in a little bit. Matthew, are you
Yes.
still with me? Do you want to say a few words about our December program?
Yes. So first of all, I want to thank everyone today for being here. And we're going to be working on talent, and we would like to encourage you to put out your talent and show us what you can do. We will be requesting here shortly some a video from say 2 to 4 minutes max of some talent that you have and that we can show other people. And we'll also be putting together a program on how to use your talent in coaching and along with music, which is getting finalized at this time. So we'll get you more details soon in your email. Check back. And please also know that you're really important to the growth of Triad Coaching Connection and getting good presenters and talks like the one today. So please reach out to me. I'll put my information back in the chat box, and Mitch and I are there to help you get the best programs that we can out there. So if you know someone or you'd like to present, please reach out to us. All right, and thanks.
And we've been very honored to have Mary Lobb with us today. She is our speaker for December. She came with today to check us out. So I look forward to her sharing with us next time. So be sure to check our website, check the LinkedIn page, start a discussion, stay connected. This is a connection, the Triad Coaching Connection, and we need to make sure that we stay connected and look at all the resources that we have. Thank you for attending today. Thank you again, Paul, for a dynamic presentation and program, and we will see you all next time.
Thank you. I'll hang out here for a bit.
That's great. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.